Good afternoon and welcome everybody. There are several new faces here today with us who are here because of Professor K.T Ravindran, but who don't know what we do, why we do it, and what we do here at the Kerala Museum. And so I thought I'll begin by giving you a quick introduction to the space. The Museum of Kerala History was a dream of the visionary philanthropist R. Madhavan Nayar, an initiative of the eminent Foundation, a public charitable trust. It is one amongst many philanthropic initiatives that were part of his long-term vision to create positive impact through education and outreach in the areas of the arts, heritage, and culture in Cochin. Over now a 37-year-long period as a non-governmental initiative, providing authentic learning experiences here, the museum has hosted over 500,000 visitors and ignited the minds of school children from over 5,000 schools from all over India. Since 2016, through its programs, from lectures, workshops, conversations, screenings, or performances, powered by in-house curation and collaborations, the Kerala Museum has strived to provide a vibrant platform for the arts in Kochi city. The encompassing objective being to encourage critical thinking, tolerance towards the world around us, and better citizenship. This event, organized in partnership with the Institute of Urban Designers in India, gives us an excellent opportunity to inspire and delight a transdisciplinary audience as we work collectively towards actualizing the potential of the museum as an agent of social change. In our efforts to garner support to keep this legacy for Kochi City alive, I'm delighted to announce that Muthoot Finance has come on board as our renewable energy partner via their CSR initiative to sponsor the solar panel here at the museum. The solar plant reduces the burden of cost of power that we incur to preserve the museum's modern Indian art collection. We thank Muthoot Finance for their invaluable support. I would also like to thank our chief guest, eminent Foundation trustee, Dr. Venu V, for gracing this occasion. I also acknowledge the presence of eminent Foundation trustees, P. Narayanan and Ram Nayar, and K.T Ravindran, of course, soon. Today, as we come together to recognize and celebrate Professor K.T Ravindran's pioneering contribution to the field of urban design in India and beyond, I wish you a very warm welcome again. I now hand over the mic to architect Tanzim Ahmed, who is MC for today.
Thank you, Aditi. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we move on, a few house rules. We request the phones be switched off for the duration of the event. If you do need to move out of the hall, please do so after Professor K.T Ravindran's presentation and before the panel discussion. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Venu V, IAS, Home Secretary, Kerala State, to address the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall be as brief as possible so as not to keep you from K.T.'s presentation. It's a great privilege for me to be here, standing before you, and speaking before Professor Ravindran. I will just talk about the first time I had my encounter with him, which probably informs much of what he's been doing and he's done across the world. 25 years ago, I was a young IAS officer tasked with this grand idea of creating a brand new destination in Kerala. It's called Bekal. You know, many of you might know the place. So that time I was armed with a 1,000-page document, a DPR, if you may, prepared by one of the very renowned architects of the state. And as a young officer, I was told that, look, everything is in here. Just go and do it. And I would look through the pages, and I was shocked to find that the document talked about erasing 4 villages, taking over those lands, and then transforming that into what could be called the Kerala's equivalent of Nuzadua, if many of you have gone there, or many other kinds of enclaves that house tourists and nobody else. And I was quite disturbed, but I didn't know how to move forward. And then I had a brainwave because I had heard about this person called K.T Ravindran in an unapproachably distant place called Delhi. I was in Calicut. I was brought up in Calicut. But I knew that he had a brother staying there who was known to my father. So, long story short, I made a call and he said, come over right away. And I went to Delhi and I met him. And that changed me, and that changed Bakel, and that helped me to throw that 1,000-page report into the dustbin. And what we finally did was we removed 50 families, relocated them, and still managed to acquire about 200 acres. He taught me at that time that there is nothing called inhuman design. There is nothing called urbanization where if the people's priorities are not taken into account and come first. I think that informs most of what Professor K.T. has done. It's influenced me to this day. Whenever I do something, I think about that person first. And I thank K.T. for putting that wonderful thought in my mind. With these words, sir, I think it's a privilege to be here to listen to you. It's always a privilege to be in your presence and to hear about your works. Like all of us here, I am looking forward to your words. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Venu. Now, may I invite Architect Biley Menon, Vice President, IUDI, to introduce Professor K.T Ravindran.
Friends, good evening. Today, we are all gathered here to listen to Professor K.T Ravindran, my teacher, an architect, urban designer, and academician of international acclaim. One of the reputed speakers of architecture and urbanism, Professor K.T Ravindran, recently delivered the prestigious Charles Correa Memorial Lecture in Kolkata. I remember from my student days in SPA Urban Design, K.T. worked with Charles Correa in the Delhi Urban Arts Commission when Mr. Correa was its chairman. Later, K.T. took the responsibility as the chairman of DUAC, and he played an instrumental role in ensuring the protection of heritage and environment of the capital city during his tenure. This was almost the same time when I was also working with him after my post-graduation in urban design. And I also happened to work on the Bakel project, documenting its heritage. So a nice coincidence that Venu sir had just mentioned that project. It was probably one of the finest documents as a person who has been continuously working in the field of ecological restoration. One of the finest documents that aim to conserve and preserve the natural and cultural heritage while taking advantage of the cultural landscape of Bakel tourism region in its master plan. So that was one of the fine experiences for me also at that time. K.T. was also a member of the advisory board for the United Nations Capital Master Plan in New York. He's a trustee of the Madhavan Nayar Foundation. K.T. has very long association with Kochi. The urban heritage conservation plans that K.T. made in the 80s as part of the Intact initiative for Fort Kochi, and also similar studies in Madurai Ghats were first of their kind and have set standards for urban conservation practice in the country. Later, I was fortunate to work with him in the team of consultants from France and Yemen on the UNESCO's Conservation Management Plan Fort Kochi and Mattancheri. He is currently the chairman of Architectural Heritage Committee of INTAC and a member of its governing council. He is also a trustee of the Indian Heritage Cities Network Foundation, popularly known as IHCN. Some of us here are his colleagues from his college days, and some of us are his students. And we are all beneficiaries of the vision, structure, and atmosphere he created in urban design education. Recent recognition by the Indian Institute of Architects with the Madhav Achwal Gold Medal was a tribute to a stupendous academic career which spanned over 40 years. His unique approach to education has become a model that has inspired hundreds of academicians across the country. In his long tenure as head of the Department of Urban Design at School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, and also as the founding president of Institute of Urban Designers India, he has made unparalleled contributions in advancing the urban design profession, which is a relatively new field. As a result, today we can see every city administration in the country has included urban design in their planning, policies, and projects. Professor Ravindran's current practice includes design of greenfield cities, cultural buildings, memorials. In fact, he is designing a memorial for Justice V.R. Krishnayar here in Kochi. Adaptive reuse and urban conservation. His works in the field has earned him much renown and are published in journals and books internationally. He has pursued sustainable architecture and urban design consistently, championing the cause in many international forums and also in academia. With those words of introduction, let me invite Professor K.T Ravindran to the stage to speak about his creative process, POISE in Context. K.T.
In order to hide my embarrassment, I need the lights off. All of it, if you can. Yeah, the light is okay, but I think people won't be able to see the lower part of the slide. Is it possible to lift the frame a little bit, marginally? As much as possible. No, it's not okay. Sorry, I think the light should be off if possible. Screen pokambato. Screen. Can the image be lifted by 6 inches? No. I'm saying this more black space on top, that's at the bottom. People won't be able to read what is at the bottom. Or they won't be able to see the slides at the bottom. So thank you, Dr. Venu and Biley, for those very nice words that you said. Now I'll have to make a valiant effort to live up to those words. So I'll try hard. So basically what I will show you are only selected 3 projects, and some of them, 14 other projects, are in the panels there in smaller forms and with less explanation. But this word that you see on the words that you see on the screen, POISE in context, is derived from a quote from Swami Chinmayananda, who said that poise in action is yoga. Poise in action is yoga. So I thought that was a very generic and very kind of incisive statement. So I readopted that for my practice. Because one of the first projects I did in Delhi was the Chinmaya Center for World Understanding on Lodi Road. So that's where the terminology of poise in context comes from. So I will show you 3 projects which are actually representative of the kind of practice we have, which I would call rather presumptuously as a value-based practice. We don't take up normally commercial kind of projects. We only take up institutions and government projects and various other projects which represent a value in society rather than just, any kind of maximizing the FAR type of project. So I'll just go on with this. Yeah. This is like a statement about the kind of practice that we used to run. One very important point I want to make right from the beginning is that the kind of diversity of practice that one has cannot be produced by one person. The level of complexity that we have in the environment, the level of complexity we have in the financial systems, level of complexity we have in the management of projects on site, we can no more call it as one person's project. It is always collaboration, and it is always a confluence of different minds coming together to create a set of ideas which then finds focus in the final building. So this is a very critical part, because it means that the responsibility for the production of architecture does not lie only in the person who owns the office. Okay? It is owned by every person, including a trainee who comes into the office to work, because everyone's opinion is considered, and we have an open channel communication all the time, which then generates a more and more complex and more diverse kind of practice. So the diversity that comes out of the office is in fact the contribution of a diverse group of people with multiple talents, different kinds of emphasis, different kind of value base and so on. But somewhere you think together. And once one is able to generate that environment for people to think together, then it is an easy flow towards realizing a building project. So that's the fundamental basis which I want to emphasize right in the beginning, that it's not, when I say it is my studio, it means I paid for the studio, nothing more than that. Yeah? Lots of people, very young, sparkling minds have contributed to the kind of work that's come out of the studio. Oh, sorry, it's going back for some reason. Yeah. So this is just an image of a group of about 70 odd people whom I could gather. Okay, there are many more, maybe close to 100 people who actually worked in my studio for the last 30, 40 years. And I asked all of them to send their own images, or if they didn't send it, I had many of their photographs which I had taken myself, or I stole it from their Facebook, or I stole it from their WhatsApp image and so on, and made a collage of the images of people. And it's a very invigorating thing for me to look back at the people who actually contributed to all this work. And this happy, very bright group of people. I was lucky to get some of the brightest people in Delhi to come and work in the studio. They are all doing extremely well now. This is like so many years of contribution of work. Didn't mean that I had all these people working together at the same time. It never went more than 10 architects, because I always pegged it at that level to ensure that it remains a small practice where you can give personal attention to every project. It was never more than that number, because it's just a fallacy that if you employ more people, you can visit the office less and you can do more work. It's just the other way around. The more people you have, the more time you need to give to that. And not only that, the less time that you can apportion between one project and the other. So it's better the idea was that we remain small and we remain intense and create an environment of co-production where everyone is able to contribute to the projects that we have done. You can see also Biley Menon here, because we have done some projects together. His wife also had collaborated with me on some occasions. So this is the first important what you can call a deviation or a variation from the way we conceptualize an architectural practice, is that it is not done by one person. It's a collective production. So I will now show you 3 projects, each of them driven by a different kind of value. First one will be the Jawaharlal Nehru Junior College, which I did, or our studio did, in Lakshadweep Islands. Then we'll show you Rajiv Gandhi Ninevakam, which is the memorial of Rajiv Gandhi where he was assassinated in Sri Perumbudur. And then we have another cultural center called Banabhatta Antarbharati Sanskriti Kendra. Banabhatta was one of the Navaratnas of Vikramaditya's court. Bana, he's known as. He was a poet, playwright, and a kind of dramatist and so on. So it's a cultural center which is set up in a university, inside the campus of a university, in his name, to actually promote various forms of art, including performing arts. So these are the 3 projects I'll show you, but on the other side you have a map of India identifying the places where our practice actually created things. Yeah? Many of them, all the ones you see in blue, are in fact projects that were done. It's scattered across the country. And the yellow spots that you see are actually projects where we have contributed in policy, not simply only in design, because the office was also involved in creating policy documents for various projects across the country. So these 3 projects will be, I'll quickly go through the 3 projects. First one is the Jawaharlal Nehru Junior College in Lakshadweep. The image that you see is of an island's woman, and very interesting, very specific ethnic group of people. I'll come to that a little later. First, let me show you what the island is all about. This is an image of Lakshadweep Islands. I was lucky at that time to travel with the Home Minister from the center in a helicopter. So, because I was with the Home Minister, no one could object to me taking pictures in places where you're not allowed to take pictures. So I liberally took images from the sky. And what you see there is is one of the islands. Yeah? And Lakshadweep actually is a group of 36 islands covering an area of, I'm reading it out because I'm sure many of you cannot read the text. Yeah? It's about 32.62 square kilometers of area, and it's about close to 400 kilometers away from the Kerala coast in varying widths in various locations. And the islands have a flat sandy landmass and rise only a few meters above the sea level. In most cases, it rises about a meter above the sea level, but according to statistics, there are also places which are 5 meters above. And the average temperature is about 27 to 30 degrees, very much like what you would enjoy in a coastal area. The rainfall is very high, like it is in Kerala. The most critical factor is that it's an extremely fragile physical environment. The Lakshadweep Islands have generated an equally delicate vernacular architecture, though strongly influenced by building traditions from the mainland Kerala. The critical thing here is the water-land balance that there is in Lakshadweep Island is perhaps the most important environmental input that one needs to consider while designing in that island. I don't think the present moves by the government to do all kinds of things in Lakshadweep I don't think it's going to go anywhere, mainly because in another 50 years we don't know the fate of the island. A lot of it may go under sea level rise. Yeah? And even if that doesn't go, I think they'll make sure that they destroy it before the sea actually rises. Because that's the kind of policy that one is unfortunately seeing there, where extremely capital-intensive development projects are being planned without any consideration for either for the physical environment of the place or for the social environment of the community who lives there. So there's a major issue happening, which is why all the more it is important for me to show this project to you, because here the environment design interface was the most critical factor. I won't read through the text because I think then it'll take me too much time. I'll simply read out to you the responsive design moves that we made. First one is existing sanatorium building was restored. Yeah? There was a leprosy sanatorium building which the PWD wanted to raise to the ground and then built the new school, which we were asked to design. But we insisted that they should not destroy the building, because an existing building is the most sustainable building. Any new building actually leads to more unsustainable kind of environmental condition. So it was very important to actually retain what is existing and then build upon that as the base. So we were able to prevail upon the PWD only because I came from Delhi. If I was a local architect, I would not have been able to prevail upon them, because I was coming with the minister and so on. They had to listen to some things that we said also. So the PWD agreed to retain the building, even though they were all waiting for the demolition contractors to come and sign up. So then we, in fact, restored that sanatorium building, added one more floor. Now, this adding one more floor was a critical thing, because generally in the island they built only single story. They don't build double story. And we made it double story because we wanted to conserve land. It was a residential school and the island is not used to having that amount of built mass loaded onto the island. So we had to make sure that we save land by putting at least the rooms on top of each other. So all buildings were, most of the buildings, 80% were two-story buildings. Now, we avoided water-intensive in-situ concreting. We minimized it by doing something else, which in today's term would be from some other term, that is embodied energy terms and so on, would be considered inappropriate. Mainly because the resources, building resources in the island one was banned from exploiting it. Yeah? Because there was excessive mining of stone, which is a very soft limestone that they build with, and excessive construction of building blocks by using corals, which is so beautiful corals. They are building materials there because they create like concrete blocks with them, and they use that in construction. So all this was banned because they were actually corroding the essential resources of the island. So that came in my aid also to suggest that we will do not concreting in situ because it will consume a lot of sweet water, but we'll bring in prefab lightweight concrete from all the way from Pune. We sourced it in Pune and it was shipped to the island, and we must have saved, like, I didn't make the calculations, but many liters of water for concreting. So water intensive systems were avoided, building materials were brought in from the mainland, and paving and hard surfacing was minimized. Only essential places we did paving. Otherwise it's completely open landscape because there is what you call the image that you see is of a sweetwater lens, which is below the limestone layer, which by magic remains uncontaminated by seawater. So that is sweet water which the islanders can extract for drinking and bathing and so on. Otherwise, if there is a incursion of the salt water from the sea into the sweetwater lens, the entire island's water would be contaminated and they'll have to abandon the island. Nothing short of that, because it's not possible to live there anymore. So it's very fragile environment. So water extraction and water use had to be very carefully planned in the construction process. Then 2 parallel water systems are involved. Salt water was used for all the flushing and all that, and the sweeter water was used for both from underground as well as from harvesting. Because when you're harvesting water, you're actually also harvesting, the ground is naturally harvesting that water. You're depriving the ground of harvested water when you're harvesting it yourself. So it was a kind of a balance that had to be struck between replenishing the lens and using that water for sweet water for different purposes. Now, treated sewage was not permitted into the soil strata at all, subsoil strata. Then buildings were located to save every tree. Not a single tree was cut. We in fact had to go and plot the buildings in between the tree. Because of the nature of settlements in the island, there was no problem of having a plot and a boundary and an FAR and so on and so forth. You could actually freely move the buildings around in the allotted land and locate them in a way that you don't cut any tree, which is what we did. Far more labor intensive for us, but that's precisely what we did, working with the PWD on that. Then the buildings were located to save every tree. Roof heights were kept below the tree cover, even though they are 2-story, with a pitched roof. It should come below the tree cover so that the tree cover actually dominates the skyline. Similarly, the buildings are also kept away from the island's edge, so that when you approach the island in a ship, you don't see a row of buildings, but you only see the coconut trees. And the island is hidden, and the buildings are hidden behind the coconut palms. Then open access to all buildings through open land. There were no roads and paths which are built. Okay? The habit of the islanders is to walk in the sand and go from one place to the other. They don't look for a road. The road was there only for PWD to bring in the construction materials and take water, then machineries to be brought in, and the kind of urban management system. There was one road in the central to the whole island. Apart from that, people just walk freely. So that is the system that we followed within the campus. No roads were built, no paths were built. People just walk freely through the landscape and go into each building. Now, open access to all buildings through open land. And compound walls were avoided wherever possible, except in the case of the girls' hostel, where a compound wall was inevitable because the islanders were not used to sending either the girls or boys to live in another island. They always grew up in their own island. So going and staying somewhere was a great sense of insecurity to have a residential school for them, and that was not socially acceptable at that time. But now, so we had to secure the girls' hostel with a compound wall. Actually, one should be building compound walls everywhere if that's the logic, but unfortunately that's what they wanted to do. So in order for it to be acceptable to the community, we had to take precautions only around that. Then to resist high wind velocity, 33 to 35 degrees slope was given to the roofs, because we figured out that it is at that pitch that there's the least amount of lifting of the tiles by high wind. First of all, because the islands are only half a kilometer or 1 kilometer wide, it does not gather sufficient velocity in the wind. Unless you have about 50 kilometers of land mass, the wind velocity does not escalate. It just passes over the island. That's why these islands have lived for so long. Others, they would have been far long back destroyed by storms and etc. So that's the principle that we also had to respect. And we ensured that when there is a high wind, the tile slopes will be such that they won't get dislocated. So these are a few of the factors which actually led to the principles of design that we followed in this place. Now, I'll just quickly read this. They're just points about the social environment of the place. They're very ancient people, matrilineal Muslims, almost from the inception of Islam. Okay? It is said that the population originally settled when Cheraman Perumal moved across to go to Mecca, and some shipwrecked people actually settled there, and that's how the population began. And subsequently, when Islam came into Kerala coast, these people also got converted. Then they speak a form of archaic Malayalam, not the kind of Malayalam that we speak. There's Tamil words mixed, and there are some other words which we can't follow. It's part of their language. And nearly 1400 years of continuous history, living amidst the spirits of their ancestors. They have great beliefs in spirits, because their ancestors are buried in that same land where they're living. Thank you. Thank you. Ancestors are right below, right there in that same soil. Yeah? So in the night, they cover up their windows with, coconut leaf screens and etc. So the spirits won't come inside the house in the night. Only when it's raining, they sleep inside the house. Otherwise, they live and sleep outside, because they are scared of the spirits inside the house. Yeah? So it's a very interesting belief system, which finds its resonance in the way they use the internal spaces. People spend most of the time outdoors. Then they are fishing, trading, and seafaring people with very intelligent, wind-swept faces. Moving into modern education nowadays, many of them are studying engineering, medicine, and so on. And fragile, it has a very fragile ecology, as I described. It has only white sand, no soil. Okay? So there's no diversity of vegetation. It's just monoculture of just coconut palms and nothing else. There are only towards the edge of the sea, there are these very hardy kind of plants, which are kind of soil-hugging plants, which prevent erosion. And that's the only vegetation that will survive in that location. Then we have full of coconut palms. Then we have a vernacular architecture that's born off the land and a living culture in that place. So these are all the kind of ingredients that you had as design resource, this nature of this place, both social and physical environment. I think I'll have to move a little faster because I'm taking a lot of time. So just images of some of the faces of the islanders. I think it's very important to see those faces, because they are not the normal kind of people that you see in mainland. They are very different. They have a very different kind of expression on their face. Yeah? And the stone blocks that you see there are actually the limestone blocks with which they built their buildings. They construct it themselves. They don't have labor coming from outside and so on. They build it themselves. So it's purely a vernacular form of construction. So this shows the layout of the place that we made. Buildings are scattered within the trees. Some trees are inside the courtyard, some are outside, and the buildings are adjusted in such a way that they are able to kind of almost like dance with the landscape and not line up like in a military parade in a line. Yeah? So, and buildings are actually located in the open landscape without compound walls, roads, or even paved paths to protect the contiguous visual character of the land. So, in other words, the nature of the land itself gives you a solution as to how to organize entries, exits, etc., and how movement between these entry exits can be organized by people themselves freely in the open land. Only the girls' hostel, of course, had this one. So the plan that you see here is of the hostels. There were two sites, two locations where we organized the buildings. This side has largely the boys' hostel and the other related buildings in it. Whereas on the other side, we have the girls' hostels. What you see here is the girls' hostel, and it has a compound wall and a defined entry because that was socially required to do so. And the architectural expression is very direct and egoless, bringing the culture-specific design to the threshold of acceptability of the island's fragile social fabric. In other words, the nature of the building had to be one which is socially acceptable nature. They are not used to seeing two-story buildings, but so one had to make every effort to scale the building down, kind of differentiate the built form in such a way that it's not, imposing its ego on the physical environment, but is subservient to the environment. And the building must look like it has always been there. That is one of the criteria with which it was done. So that it doesn't look like a new building thrust upon the island, but it looks like it's part of the island's already living culture. And I'm happy to say that now people are very proud of this campus and they've maintained it extremely well. It's like 30 years old. I show you an image of I'm not able to go back on it. Why does one go back? How does one go back? Sorry. Oh, yeah, okay. Here, this one? Yeah, okay, all right. So you can see that after 30 years, the buildings are still well maintained. These photographs are taken a few months ago. And you can see how well maintained the buildings are in 30 years of time. Because the islands actually they own it. They own the buildings. And they're proud of the buildings. And it's very well maintained even by the PWD, who otherwise is not known for their quote-unquote efficiency. Because they're not used to being efficient. That's not part of their lifestyle. They are fishermen. They're not used to, kind of looking at the clock and operating in principles and so on. They just live with their environment. It's a kind of experiential way of interaction with the environment. So they are able to maintain this very well because they have a sense of ownership. I think that I would say is the biggest hallmark of its success is that it's now owned by the community. They're proud of it. So these are more images of how these spaces were created. Now, an important thing is that, as I told you, is that people don't live inside the buildings most of the time. They spend most of their lives outside. So the buildings have a porous outer skin and plenty of covered verandas that mediate the relationship between the natural landscape around the buildings. This is the first residential school campus in Lakshadweep Islands, and the life of the student is spent largely outdoors, in balconies and verandas when it's raining, and in the outdoors, simulating the traditional lifestyle of the village. People are just scattered around buildings, not inside them. So one had to create that kind of environment where it's possible that the interface between the covered, closed rooms and the external environment has to be mediated so that you create those interceding spaces which are comfort spaces for people to use. So there's just an image of the building, which was actually the sanatorium, which was then restored and turned into a classroom and library and so on. So with that, we quickly move on to the next project. That is the Rajiv Gandhi Ninevakam at Sriperumbudur. Ninevakam actually means a place where, an internal space where somebody's memory is enshrined. This comes from the Tamil Sangam period concept of Agam and Puram. Even their poetry was divided between Agam poetry and Puram poetry. Puram poetry actually meant poetry that's written about the weather and about the beautiful clouds and the sky and so on. And Agam poetry was always about the interiority of the people, emotions and so on. So there were this kind of classification which is strongly drawn in the Tamil culture. So this name Ninevagam came out of that word. Nineva is, of course, memory. Agam is what actually encloses or enshrines the memory. So it's a Tamil equivalent of the word memorial. And this word came from the contractor. The contractor named it like this. Contractor explained it to me what it is. Contractor was a very learned man, not the normal contractor. He was a very educated, very, very kind of insightful man. And he came out with this suggestion when we were struggling to find a name for it. Because it couldn't have a Hindi Sanskritized name. It wouldn't be acceptable in Tamil Nadu. And nor could it have only a Tamil name, in which case it cannot be understood by people who are not from Tamil Nadu. So one was actually struggling to find a word, and the contractor came. It was a company called Saraswati and Constructions, and they did the miraculous job of the project, fabulous job of the project, and the man also gave it this name, and I presented this name to the committee sitting in Delhi, which is normally chaired by Mrs. Gandhi, and they accepted the name when I explained that this is what it means. So the contractor actually gave the name. When I say collaborative practice, it means even this is a form of collaboration, that one is able to dig into one's own psychological history and arrive at a point where it can be externalized as a new entity. That is the level in which participation was part of it. But at the same time, I think I'll have to be a little faster, no? Yeah? Yes, okay. All right, not a little, very fast, okay? So, what you see on the screen is the photograph which I took in my first visit to the site in Sriperumbudur. When Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, they called for a small limited competition of 5 architects to produce schemes to build the memorial. Yeah? And ours was the chosen project, and that's how we were able to build it. But it took 10 years to build it. Okay? When you see the project, you will see why it took 10 years. Okay? And but in the first visit that you make to a site, it is always a very critical visit for me and for my practice, because that is the point which you get into a communion with the land. You don't analyze in your first visit. You are simply absorbing images and your experience of wandering through the site. That actually begins to shape your internal attitude towards how the project should develop. So this is the image of a pond which was existing it was a village land where he was the election rally was organized and where he was assassinated in the village land. And it was also had a number of ponds on site. So this is one of the ponds. And just as I was standing at the edge of the pond, a frog leapt into the water. And you can see the, that the reverberation of the waves inside the water when the frog jumped into it. And I recalled a poem which I had read. I'm not telling a story. This is the fact. This is what really happened. I know it looks like a post-design constructed story, but it really is not that. This is the real story that I used to read and reread this man called Basho, who was a 13th century Japanese haiku poet. There was a small book he wrote called The Narrow Road to the Long North, to the North. And in that book was full of these haiku poems. And one of them was about the frog leaping into the water. So what struck me when I saw that happen was the connect between Basho's poem and the site. So it says, breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into the water, a deep resonance. He doesn't explain anything at all. He just leaves it at resonance. So that resonance is what actually then grew into the project. And the character, the physical character, the program, and also the final experiential character of the place actually grew out of that idea of that resonance. So this is the transparency and the luminosity of this pond which actually informed the way we conceptualized the whole project. I am not exaggerating, I am not telling you a story. Let me repeat again. This is the real thing. We share this in the studio. I project these images of the site in the studio, and all 10, 12 of us sit around and we discuss and we kind of internalize the images that we see. Then it gives rise to the program. So, it is this image which actually informed the project. First decision was that we will not have a roof on the memorial. Okay, it will be an open to sky memorial. Because you cannot build a roof over something like this. You cannot enclose it. You have to allow it to flow. You have to allow the waves to actually move, laterally into the system, into the community. So these are more hard nuts about how the program was developed. So the site becomes the most important context, because the manner in which you communion with the site, not how you analyze it. In the second visit, in the third visit, you measure, you analyze, you cut up the site, you use geometric measures to find the angles of the corners. You do all kinds of things. But in the first visit is a one-to-one communion. And that provides the qualitative content into the whole project. Now, here are a few images of, one was the site, and the little shed-like thing that you see on top is actually the place where his head was found. His body was kind of scattered in the whole land, and it was all blood spilled all over the place. 16 other people also died with him. Okay, not only just one person. But his head was found in this one spot, and that spot became what we call the point from where the rest of the organization of the site took place. So central government funded the project, and the state government gave the land. They gave 12 acres of land, and to build a memorial. So what we call the spot is the center where you see the soil in which Rajiv Gandhi's blood was mixed. Okay, so the first response was that let's not cover this land. Let this land be in touch with the sky all the time. Let's not cover anything here. So that the area was demarcated, and that became the central spot. Then we, of course, I went around studying all the temples in the nearby places, and we had to at least make sure that whatever we built becomes an interesting ruin. Because it's one way of thinking about your building, Because if you build it in concrete, it has 60 to 80 years of life maximum. Then it begins to crumble. And I tell you, bad concrete, ruined concrete looks really horrendous. It doesn't look like a pretty ruin. Whereas when you see a temple that's in ruin, or when you see an old building which is built with lime and stone as a ruin, you can see that in its ruinous condition, it has a dignity to itself. So the idea was that if you want to build like timelessly, like the neighboring Tamil Nadu towns have all built, Tamil Nadu is like scattered with fabulously built temples. So there's any amount of inspiration that you can draw from there. So the idea was then we built something that is what has been in our architectural parlance called timeless architecture. In fact, that means an architecture which even as a ruin would maintain its dignity. So that's one great source for us to take from. Then, of course, you have the Mahabalipuram's great bas-relief, which became a direct input into the memorial. You have Ramanujam, Srinivas Ramanujam, who was a mathematician. He also lived not far away from this place. So there's a mathematical genius that is embedded in the Tamil people. That's why they are still dominating, along with the Telugus, who also have it in equal measure, that deep sense of mathematics in them, that they are able to literally rule the world of the electronics. Because they have that deep sense of mathematics, they understand systems. Mathematics is nothing but systems. So they have that deep understanding of systems, and which should become then an important component into the project. Then we have some images of the kind of people who visit the memorial. Even when there was nothing there, thousands of people used to come there to visit the memorial. And they are actually, just normal Tamil farmer kind of people whose aesthetic was like quite different from what you see in other locations. Then the other important thing was that the sense of scale which the Tamils have. Tamils have a great sense of scale. They love scale. You go to Chennai, you will find cinema hoardings which are like kind of sky, touching the sky, because they love that scale. There's a drama in that scale. And when they have a political meeting, they gather in lakhs and lakhs of people gather on the Marina Beach. They cut their finger and they put Rakta Tilak on themselves. As that's a kind of collective emotion they are capable of. Very few people in India are capable of that. But the Tamil people have that capacity. So there is a kind of, everything has an emotional investment and a sense of scale, collective scale, that is expressed in the form. So this is something which, the image you have here is of Valluvar, Thiruvalluvar, built next to Vivekananda statue in Kanyakumari. And it's a humongous thing, all done in stone, without any concrete. So this became a direct input into the way we conceptualized the scheme. Now here is a quotation from a very well-known Tamil contemporary Sthapati. He's just recently died. His name is Ganapati Sthapati. He said the universe is subject to a mathematical formula, and architecture is yet another manifestation of this formula. He is a Sthapati who builds using Vastu Shastra as the basis. So the kind of conceptual understanding they have of the universe as a system is that it's organized through a mathematical formula, which then every room becomes a microcosm of the universe when you build it. That's a kind of connect they make with the universe. It takes a very cultured mind to be able to arch that kind of spaces. So that became a critical factor in the way we conceptualized the space. I think I'll have to go faster. Sorry, I keep saying that every second. So basically, more than just building, it became the architecture of space. Because what you need to, the actual operative part of a building is its space. Walls are just the materiality of the walls, and the roofs and the floor is actually just enclosing space. Their role is secondary to that of space. The real transformative power is in space. So if you can design the space, then you can move your material side of the project around, then you get a result which is a more transformative kind of result. Yeah? So that became the principle on which we built this. And this is the model which actually won us the project. It's quite different from what has been built subsequently. Not quite different, but fundamentally it's the same, but the details have changed. On your left side, you will see a longish building, which was actually a museum of technology. Yeah? But it was never built. It could not be built. I'll tell you why. Because the plan which the PWD had sent me as the survey drawing of the site was completely wrong. It was some lowest tender product which had nothing to do with the reality of the site. So finally, from what they sent me, I made a drawing in which we articulated the spaces, interlinked spaces and buildings and so on. And when we finally got the real survey done, this thing will sit nowhere on the site. Half of it is in the village. And the other half is like going into the pond, you know. I mean, it was a disastrous exercise. So finally we had to reconfigure the plan, and we realized that we cannot build this kind of a museum there. This museum was made on the, what is called the Satram of the Tamil culture, where you have a large pond next to a temple and places of rest all around it built in stone. Big colonnades in which pilgrims come and take rest. It's a beautiful space of repose. It's quiet, reposeful space. So that was the model on which the whole museum was conceived. But we had to abandon the museum because the site just wouldn't go anywhere near. The site plan was so completely different, totally different. So we had to abandon that. And then, of course, along with that also comes political changes, which progressively makes you abandon more and more things. But anyway, we were able to build the male memorial. And so the manner in which you interpret context, the manner in which you excavate ideas from the environment is what actually can contribute more substantially to your programming for the project. So the program was entirely informed by that. Finally, what you see here became something like this. Yeah? That is, the spot where his head was found is a fixed point. Then there was the temple Shikhara in Sri Perambadur, which was built in the 11th century by Sri Ramanujacharya. That 11th century temple Shikhara became the connect between the spot and the temple town. So that it belongs to that town in some way. And that line remained the ordering principle of the project. And the whole configuration was done, configuration of columns, etc., was done around around the spot, but in an oval shape, because an oval, unlike a circle, has a direction. It has two center points, two circles intercept to create an oval, and that oval has a directionality, which then gives me the opportunity to connect the temple Shikhara in one direction. So the oval was aligned in that direction. And it had only one small building, which was the facility center, where you had the toilet and a little office and so on, which is what you see at the bottom. And what the images that you see is from behind the facility building. The sketch that you see here was, it is not built. That's why it is still a sketch. The sketch was done in such a way, we took a long time to do the sketch, because the sketch must look like an idea and not like a building. So it had to actually vanish within its own context. So that's what we attempted in this. This was going to be the Pan-Mathematical Research Center. Because we found that mathematics is one discipline which actually penetrates music, to dance, to architecture, to art, to every form of human expression. It can be connected with mathematics. It's an underlying formula. So this is supposed to have been a research center which will with a huge library, which will inquire into mathematics as a phenomena that interconnects disciplines. So it was going to be a pan-mathematical research center. It's another factor that we could not find someone to be the director of this place. Searched far and wide. All the scientists want to stay in the lab. They don't want to come and, kind of entertain a hairy-fairy idea like this. They are interested in astronomy. They are interested in pure mathematics. They are interested in music. They are interested in town planning. They are interested in building, but not in how they are connected. So it was quite tough to find a one. But anyway, as political fortunes turned, this part never got built. Okay, so the monument was conceived in two parts. One was the passive side of the monument, which is a reflective side, which got built, luckily. And the other was the active side, where this Pan-Mathematical Research Center and the scholars and a huge library with a triangular solar paneled roof. Mind you, this is 25 years back, never got built. So I wish it was built now. At least it would have been the first solar paneled roof in the country at that time. But it was never built. So the project was actually realized through the CPWD. The CPWD built it. And I tell you, they did a miraculous job of construction. If everyone thinks that the PWD cannot do a good job, you're mistaken. They can do a damn good job, provided they get the right orders from the right places. Otherwise, they won't do it. You just have to make sure that they want to be right and they are involved in the project. And what they have done is nothing short of a miracle. I'll show you the project in a short while. And it was funded by the central government, and there was an apex committee, advisory committee type of thing in Delhi, which was the most difficult part for me to deal with. I always talk about egoless architecture and architects' egos set aside and so on. But man, you are really tested in such committees, because everyone thinks that he or she is a designer, and they know better than you. And they are in a position to make decisions. You have to listen to them. Otherwise, you quit the project. Okay? You have only two options. Either you take what they say, you try your best to convince, but it doesn't work. Because if you think your ego is big, there are bigger ones in Delhi. And there's no way you can actually deal with it. Anyway, the main project was built entirely in stone and lime. No concrete, no steel at all. Okay, the entire project of about 6 acres or so that we developed, everything was done in stone and lime. And we had something like 300 artisans working at a time on the site, 300 stone masons working at the site, under a sthapati, not under me. A sthapati was our main collaborator. We had 3 main collaborators, art collaborators. One was Mr. A. Ramachandran, who was from Kerala, from Trivandrum. He gave many drawings, many small drawings, which our office then converted into a geometric, the second phase of inquiry. It's not just the intuitive side, but you have to turn that intuitive thing into a workable, buildable entity. That means you need to geometricize, you have to mathematize it in such a way that it's buildable. And you can call for tender and get it done. That's a tough job to do. It's just not enough if you're just artistic. You need much more than that. And I had a fabulous team of people who worked on this, and they were able to convert that. So stone was quarried from all over the other states. They were brought to the site, and every stage the stone was worshipped by the artisans. When it's being loaded, when it's taken out of the ground, it's worshipped. When it's loaded onto the truck, it is worshipped. When the truck crosses, before crossing the river, the truck and the stones will be worshipped. After crossing the river, it will be worshipped. Like this, there are 20 different places where they worship the stone. So by the time it reaches the site, it's a sacred entity which actually comes into the site. And these artisans, Tamil artisans, have got fantastic skills even now. What they did 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they can still do now. And they did a marvelous job of the building. I'll just move on very quickly. You can see the kind of structures that they made. There were no slabs, no concrete slabs. Everything was in stone slabs. Okay, beams were in stone. Yeah? Sometimes in some places I had circular beams, curvilinear beams. And the depth of the beam, the kind of material, the length of the stone, etc., are all calculated by the sthapati, not by me. There was no structural designer. Structural designer was the sthapati. Yeah? He could decide that this span, if you have a 12-foot span, you need a 10-inch slab of stone. And that depends on the kind of stone. How do they measure it? They take a wooden hammer and knock on the stone, and he listens to the resonance of the stone. From that sound he can make out whether it's a dense stone, it's a weak stone, it's got a crack inside, or it doesn't have a crack inside. Is it suitable for this purpose or is it suitable for that purpose? He can decide from the sound. It's like people going to grain merchants, going into the grain market, picking up rice in their hand like this, washing it, smelling it, and say, okay, this will be 150 rupees a kilo. It's that kind of intuition and that type of internalizing of memories which actually gives them the ability to design and structurally configure very complex structures. So this man was the sthapati of the Kanchipuram Kamakshi temple. He was restoring that temple. His whole family has been restoring that temple. And he was the head sthapati. And apart from Ramachandran, there was also Mr. Ram Sutar, who does fabulous bronze castings. And there was also another artist called Sanjay Bhattacharya, who did, kind of stone inlay work and all by using Agra artisans. So these three artists collaborated with us. Apart from that, our main collaborator and our guide and our philosopher was this sthapati. Humble little man who's wearing a dhoti and a starched white shirt. He comes into the site and he stands like this to me. Yeah? But the man is handling 25 times more expensive work than I am handling. Yeah? He's building temples all around the world. He's a very wealthy man and he's extremely talented and he knows his job. But he is so humble when he comes to the site. I'm not saying this as a romanticized thing. Yeah? He was a very humble man. That's a fact. Yeah? And I learned a lot from him because he was using his intuition to decide things. Yeah? And I had to trust him. Because if I don't trust him, I have no other way to test what he has done. Okay? Nor is the CPWD who's building capable of doing it. Their attitude is, you give me the design, we'll put it up. We'll hire the contractors to put it up. But the contractor, as I said, was a very, very insightful man. So it's really not just, the architect who's doing everything and he's the boss of the show and so on. There are lots of these people who are so critical in bringing out the final quality of the building. This is what was the columns, 7 columns, which are finally built in oval configuration. I did not, in my original design, I did not have these black sculptural things that are on top. I had just silent columns. Okay? And these columns had no embellishments at all. They were just like, just plain 15 meters high, that's about 50 feet high, and about 1.2 meter dia, solid stone, no concrete, no steel, stone and lime. So just by self-weight, it's able to stand on its own. It's a compression-based structure. So, but finally the Tamil MPs and all came around and said, madam, this doesn't look like, nothing sacred about this. A sacred thing should have a head and a foot. Where is the head in this? Where is the foot? Massive cultural difference between my perceptions and theirs. Yeah? But if they want it that way, they have it that way. because it's not my project, it's everybody's project, it's these people's project. It's the most important symbol for the Congress party in Tamil Nadu. It's another factor that after this they just went down the drain. That's another factor. But at that point of time, this was a very important symbol. They in fact had a major rally here. And in order to accommodate that rally, unfortunately our landscape architect, Professor Shahir, closed all the ponds. Because otherwise they were scared that these congressmen will go and fall into the pond. So they have to be closed. So they closed the ponds. I was dead against the closing of the ponds. Because I had also in my original report brought out a 1916 map of showing how this ponding system in this whole area called Tonde Mandalam is actually what is preventing flooding in Chennai. And I had written in my report, I'm not joking, I had written in my report 25 years ago that if you close these ponds, there will be floods in Chennai. And one of the main reasons why Chennai flooded is because they fooled around with these ponds all over, not only in our site. Our site was only a small thing with 3-4 little ponds. And the massive silting in the larger ponds. That's what led to the floods. Yeah? So in our site also, unfortunately, it was closed. But then he was a landscape architect, and I was his collaborator. Yeah? So anyway, it was closed. The ponds were closed. And this is the kind of landscape that we finally got, where you have these columns carrying, originally the columns are representing 7 principles of Rajiv Gandhi's, around which Rajiv Gandhi lived his life, according to the people who Kapila Vatsyayan, I think, was the main person who conceptualized it. And that is what was represented by the 7 columns. But then they hoisted all these things on top, which were built which are taken from the Vedas and built by Ram Sutar in his studio in Delhi. Each one is like, 6 tons, 7 tons in weight. They were transported back to the site and erected on top of this. And erecting on top of this was a very, very tough task. We had to invite a traditional, quote-unquote, tribe of people from Kerala who have traditionally, right from the 500 years back from the Portuguese time onwards, been loading and unloading in ships, kalasas, who could then precisely place this heavy stuff on top of so we had to hire them. And fortunately, the CPWD specifications had this group of skilled labor as part of the schedule. So we could call them, and they came and placed them on top. Another form of strange from nowhere, this group of people came and they collaborated with the project. And till now, these things have not fallen. They are still sitting there. I don't know how long it will do so. This is the, what you see on the side are the embellishments on these columns. You can see the detail of that with the flag in one place. And that's the village route which actually was aligned between the column and the pond. They used to fetch water from the pond. And that became our direction for this one. And these are the carvings which were figured out by Ramachandran from 5th, 6th century Gupta period sculptures of rivers. Each river was represented by a different kind of form to represent the flow of water. And he gave a little sketch, hand sketch like that of that to us. And one extremely skilled architect sat through night and day and converted this into geometric forms which will actually wrap around the columns without any misjoints. So it will be a continuous circle of these symbols. It had to be done very precisely without computers back in the early 90s. So I don't know how much of it you can read on the screen, but it was, and it's carved by the Tamil sculptors. This is the approach that actually finally leads to this one. In my original scheme, the approach was a direct path, the path on which Rajiv Gandhi walked to the place of his death. That was my access path, but then that was not aligned to east. Yeah? So the Tamil MPs came back and said, look, this is not done in our place. Every approach has to be from the east, otherwise it has no validity. So we had to, create a curved pathway which will connect that axis, and then it had to be approached from that eastern direction, the whole memorial. This is the original path on which he walked, but is not used as a path to approach the Aswan. It's a very direct path. Yeah? I'll move quickly because... so finally that museum of camera and photography technology became a bas-relief of India's progress, sketched very skillfully by Ramachandran, very skillfully done. In fact, when I was looking for an artist to collaborate, my father-in-law, who's a painter, told me that there are very few artists who can draw. Most of them cannot draw. Yeah? So he said Ramachandran has a good hand, he can draw. So that's how I went to him. And he did a fabulous sketch for this whole one. And the Tamil artisans sat and chiseled and chiseled and chiseled and made this entire bas-relief, which is 120 feet long and 20 feet high. It's all in pure stone and lime. Yeah? So there is no concrete anywhere, and these are like hand-drawn and hand-carved by them, by the artisans. That's a detail of that. Now, it shows different stages of India's progress. This is a larger view of that bas-relief. Then this is, after the bas-relief, you enter into the small court where you have the toilets and the office. And okay, it's the only small covered area in the whole project. 6 acres of land, all open. One small place which is covered, one tiny building. And this is the building which is also done entirely in stone and lime. Yeah? Even the roofs are all built in lime and stone. You can see what it looks like. It has, luckily, was not subjected to any kind of embellishments by anyone else outside, so I could keep it very clean and clear lines, like had conceptualized the whole thing. Because it's a place of repose. It's not a place of celebration. Yeah? It's a place where somebody has actually been, one of the most horrendous deaths of being blown into pieces. Yeah? That's not the kind of place where you can celebrate. So it needs to have repose as its essential quality. So the building attempted to do that. And this is the internal courtyard of that building, where you have circular beams, fully calculated by the Sthapati. I was just, with my hands in my pocket, I was watching him carve the curved beam, and it just came out perfectly. And that's how it was built. Now, the internal walls of this building was lined with one layer of brick, so that you can drive nails, and it can be interactive walls. It won't be like stone wall to which you cannot talk. Yeah? So very detailed, 70 drawings were made only for this one small building. Yeah? Detailed drawings showing each piece of stone and how they'll be joined. And when the Vigilance Committee came, they came and measured the size of the joints, because I had specified them to be 3 mm in the drawing, and they wanted to make sure that it's only 3. If it's more than that, they'll get hooked. Yeah. So it was very precisely built by this contractor. I have not met him after I did. I would like to go and say hello to him someday. This Saraswati and company which made the building. So the whole thing was conceived only in stone and lime, using only in joints. No plastering, everything is left exposed. This is the image that you see on the poster also. Yeah? And that's like one of the original ponds we were able to retain as in a regulated form, so that the MLAs don't go and fall into them. Yeah? And growing lotus flowers in them. So that's the last shot of this project. How much time do I have, Aditi? Out of time already. All right. Yeah, okay, and I'll very quickly run through the next project, the last one. I'm sorry, it's as a professor, I'm used to a captive audience who cannot escape the classroom. So. Yeah, okay, I'll continue after the panel discussion. All right. Okay, the next project is the Banabhatta Antarbharati Sanskriti Kendra in a place called Rewa. Rewa was the constituency of Arjun Singh, who was at that time the Minister for Education. He was also Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. He is the one who patronized Korea to come and build the Bharat Bhavan. He has a tradition of patronizing architects. So he's the one who invited me to come and do this building. It's a cultural center inside a university campus. It's actually a regular university with lots of degrees and so on. 7 lakh students in that university, including affiliated colleges. And they wanted to build this cultural center in the name of Banabhatta. So the first thing, of course, is to, as I said, communion with the land. Land becomes the first resource, the nature of the land. The more you investigate the land, the more design resources will emerge from there, from the land itself. So the image that you see here is of a rock painting, about half an hour's drive from my site. The site is located in, Rewa is actually a place on top of a hillock. When you go from Allahabad, when you drive from Allahabad, after you cross the Tong River, you have the land rising into a hill. And you get a hill which has got a flat horizon, as if somebody had actually taken a leveler, planer, and kind of finished it in one line. Like that, it's a very high hill and fully rocky hill. And on top of, as you climb on top of that, it becomes a plateau. And as you climb in, you have this very rocky side rock outcrops. And inside those places, there are many caves. It's an archaeologically protected set of stone. And the caves have these fabulous paintings, the usual stuff of hunting scenes. And I don't know when they must have been drawn. Maybe 10,000 years back. I don't know how many years back. And it has, some of them has got some Buddhist references because there are some stupas also on the rock. So the land then becomes the first source of form. This is an atrophied stupa that you find, like a hillock. That's actually a stupa, which is made in brick. It's now collapsed because they use mud mortar inside, and only the outer skin is finished with lime, made waterproof. Inside is all mud mortar and stone. And in the middle of the stupa, of course, you had a relic and so on. So this became a very important ingredient in the way I approached the design of the Sanskriti Kendra. Because the main idea was that the land must become a resource and it must then inform the way we approach design. And I won't go into details. I won't read it's a very interesting text. I don't know, are you able to read the text? No. It's a quote from Black Elk, that is the Red Indian chief, who talked about how he could see more than what he saw. And he says that he can see this, when he is seeing in a sacred manner, the shapes of all things in the spirit and the shape of all shapes as they must live together like one being. This is a tribal's response to land. It's not a real estate approach to land. It's at the other end of the spectrum, the way it is approached. So when we, actually 12 acres of land was allotted for this also, the scheme. Sorry, 10 acres of land was allotted. And the tribals who lived around Riva town, Riva is a small town surrounded by very, very depressed economy. Hardly anything to eat kind of people in the villages, very dry land, rocky land and so on. And the tribals come and tie a thread on one of the trees on our site. That's the image that you see here, the big image, where they're already connecting with the site in a sacred manner. So that became an important input for me to realize that it's not enough if I look at the university and their brief. I need to go beyond the university's brief and connect with the people who are emotionally connected to this land. So an image that you have on top is one of the drawings from inside the caves. And interestingly, all the caves which had paintings were looking towards the east. Yeah? All the east-facing caves were occupied. People are living inside that. I don't know why, okay? I don't think there was anything called Vastu at that time when they did these cave paintings, because these are really very, very primordial drawings. They are not what you call cultured, cultivated, good taste of drawing. It has a robust energy, which is like so very different from how we draw. More or less like a child draws something very close to it. But there's more energy in these drawings than a child's drawing, because it's from lived experience that these drawings come out. So it also had, the area also has a lot of Buddhist sites. And the driving principles that came out was that intercommunal equity is a central value in the contemporary progressive mindset. The spontaneous power of tribal art and the studied intensity of the classical, both are brought together in an interactive relationship. There is a certain kind of energy that you find in the classical art, in the tribal art, and there is a kind of studied, cultivated finesse that you find in the classical arts. So a cultural center needs to embody both these simultaneously. And I won't go into more details. This is about the town. I'll brush past this very fast. The Riva town is actually a small principality. There's a king and so on there. There's a palace. And Arjun Singh is part of that whole Thakur lobby there. And a lot of resources came from the character of this town. Then we have the site itself as a resource. So the first encounter, as I said, is a communion encounter. And there, when you spend time alone on the site without, 5 engineers following you and the vice chancellor in his safari suit, addressing people and so on. When you don't have all that, there is another level at which you can connect with land and the site. So the encounter with the site is one such thing that you need to, I think every architect must experience that about land to begin with. So the other driving principle where I could bring in the dance as a main resource, as a performing art, as a resource into the scheme. So I took 2 diagrams. One is the tribal art of the whirling dancers around this. It's a very common image nowadays. On every bed sheet and pillow covers, you have that printed. So all of us know Warli art very well. I won't go into that. And the other is a very interesting diagram of a dancer called Ram Gopal. Ram Gopal was a Bharatanatyam dancer who lived in 30s and 40s. And he was a classical dancer. He lived in Sri Lanka. And finally, he moved to America. He moved to New York. And there he became kind of a celebrity because of his fine body and his art form. And he was innovating on Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi. And he became a kind of a celebrity there. And an artist who used to draw the ballet artist. He used to sketch ballet artists. Sketched Ram Gopal in different poses. and he made a kind of conglomerate of various poses in one diagram. It has nothing to do with what's happening on our side, okay? But the most interesting thing about this is that the diagram has a potency and a magical quality to it. Every diagram has. That is why we have all these tantric drawings and all, because those drawings have a potency that actually can impact the way you think. Yeah? And it has the capability to connect memories to lived experience, and it communicates the essence of the collective very directly as a group. Yeah? And even this singular dancer, Ram Gopal dancing as a Bharatanatyam dancer alone, also the manner in which is represented as a cluster connects the figures together in a certain way. And that became a design resource. Yeah? And the movement, energy, and the expression can then lead to the building as a diagram that remains connected to the deepest memories. You can connect memories through these diagrams. Yeah? And that's a design resource. Now, the image that you see here is one of the rock paintings. Yeah? One more diagram, the third diagram that informed the scheme. And here what you see is the thatched roofs of a whole village. Perhaps one of the first landscape drawings. It is one of the first landscape drawings like this which I have seen, without hunters and animals. It is just the village roof line, the profile of the village, and multiple suns in the sky, denoting movement of time. That this village has been there for a very long time. And you can see little smoke emitting out of the roof, the thatched roofs of these huts. Yeah? This is one of the, and you can see sky and so on, clouds on top, all those lines. If you look very closely, you can see them all. And this also informed our scheme in a very direct way. I'll just quickly go there. First thing is how the volley dancers became the ordering principle for the site plan, where we had in the center of the site, we had a large green space with a little pond, and the entire group of buildings were encircling that pond. Yeah? So what you get is a similar energy to the volley painting. Yeah? You can see them in comparison to each other. So nature is modulated with built form in an interpenetrating format to symbolize the continuum of external and internal environments of people, what is enclosed and what is outside it. Then from the earth, in its colors and content, rises the built form. Sometimes the building taking the earth into its womb, and others levitating like a child in the arms of the Mother Earth. It means there's a relationship between the land and the building is the intensity of the mother and child relationship. Yeah? And here's a model which finally gave rise to all these things when they're brought together. It gave rise to this model, and it had all these 6 different uses which is specified. I won't go into details of it. Unfortunately, only the one cluster, what I call the Ram Gopal cluster, was built. I'll show you the plan of that just now. And this is how the building actually looks in 3D while it's set on the site. So site is very undulating and full of quarries and so on. So every bit of its nuanced existence informs the way we plan the building and its relationship with the land. Now here you can see a direct translation of the Ram Gopal diagram into a plan. Yeah? Because the dancer and the actor define space by movement, and that's why yesterday, in fact, I was talking to Vineet, my nephew, who's right here, about the Chidambaram temple, which actually represents space. Shiva as space. Of the Panchabhutas, he is the space in Chidambaram. And the murti is that of a dancing Shiva, because dance is what represents space. Yeah? So here also, The dancer and the actor define space by movement and sound while being absolutely centered in motion. They are in movement and they are in complete stillness at the same time, the dancer. That's what brings the intensity to that dancing figure. Repose and vibrancy are simultaneously present in the act of performing. The dancer-actor is communicating with the self and the other. There's an interiority to the experience of dancing, and there's an exteriority to its movement and its definition of space. And at the same time, and communication is the key intent that informs the act. The dancer is communicating externally to an audience, at the same time to themselves, internally to themselves. And this simultaneity is what needs to be captured in the building. And here the key intent is to that informs the act, reaching out and simultaneously reaching out and simulating the result of the act, multiplying rhythms of movement, its mode. So there's a rhythm, there's a cycle, there's movement, there is stillness, and all of them come together in the form of a plan. How does that happen? So it's by miracle that I ran into this diagram of Ram Gopal, because one of the things I do when you enter into any large scheme is not read architecture. Don't read architecture, don't read urban design, don't read fancy theories of design. Read poetry, read about music, dance, read about everything else you can think of. All the softer arts, language, for instance, is the mother of all cultures, is language. Or rather, language is the finest expression of a culture. Is the inner rhythm of a culture is language. The music in our language is the music in the bio. That's why it is different, spoken differently in Trichur and differently in Trivandrum and differently in Tellicherry. Because it's a different biome. It's the same language, but in different music. So if you can understand that music, then that music is what makes language different from any other. Softest form of art is the most expressive, the most vulnerable form of art. And if one can bring that softness into the relationship between buildings and spaces, then you have achieved a fraction of what a poem can achieve. A fraction of it. Because it's rigid, mud and mortar and brick and cement and some horrible inert things that we bring together to make buildings. That's why after you build the building, you don't look at the building, you look at the spaces it closes, how the spaces connect and move from one to the other. That becomes the critical aspect. So what this Ram Gopal sketch gave me was the idea that centeredness and movement and communication between different entities is what informs the performance. So if your building actually has to represent performance art, like Banavata wrote about performances, this is what you need to achieve. So after seeing this drawing in the morning, I go to the studio and I drew up a sketch, and I have some really brilliant people who sit with me, help me refine, or we jointly refine the project and we externalize it and draw it. So here is the next thing that a building does is it is actually entering the earth. It's not just being built on top of the earth, it's entering the earth. In our case, we have some quarries on the site, and the quarry becomes an underground museum. We just covered the quarry, and a large quarry with this solid rock face on one side. That rock face becomes the museum face. And we have passive cooling in the place so that it's not air conditioned, but it's able to retain a certain moisture level inside. And that becomes a lower level. And in other places, the rock form is climbed about 6 meters or so to become this whole group of buildings that you see on top. So I'll show you the image of those buildings. Yeah? Here is the drawing from the cave of the Olapura that you find in the village. And that's the roof line that is generated out of that kind of a vision. Yeah? And what you see at the bottom is the actual built building with that kind of undulating roof lines which are rhythmically reproducing the image that we saw in the cave. Yeah? I'll move much faster. So the building exterior is stone clad, evocative of the colors and texture of the Suhag. Suhag Hills is the hill that you climb to arrive at the plateau where Riva is located. And you get two types of stone there. You get a black basalt stone and you get a reddish or yellow reddish sandstone. So these two colors were used in their natural form without any additions in externally cladding the building. So more images of it. And the plan actually yielded a very interesting configuration internally where Ram Gopal's limbs and arms became the connecting corridors, and you have still entities, 7 teaching rooms or teaching spaces which are in stillness. They are square buildings with a central light. Yeah? So they are still. At the same time, the arms are connecting with each other, just like we saw in the sketch. So this is an internal image of the corridors, which actually has short views which then change angle. So you don't see long corridors connecting 7 big teaching spaces. You get broken views, simultaneously twisting, turning, connecting, and you get very interesting external spaces which are not rectilinear. Yeah? The classrooms are full geometric forms which are still in their internal structure, whereas the external spaces are all dynamic spaces. So this is more image of the same corridor. The kind of courts that you get between classrooms. Small, odd-shaped courts, which you can then landscape. This is before the trees grew, actually. There are trees in the middle of these. These become places where you can come out of the class and sit on these rocks under the tree and so on. They are very informal, irregular spaces. And they, in fact, divide and connect simultaneously the classroom spaces, which are still spaces. So here's a section of the classroom and an image of it. Yeah? It's built with a central skylight and lights entering from the top to be able to function without electricity, and low-level undulating forms of windows which can be opened to get breeze at the floor sitting level. Because dance classes and performance lessons take place when people are sitting on the floor. So that's where you need the breeze. Yeah? So just by combining them, by using light and air as sources of design, one is able to generate a variety in the environment. And we also have a duct that's built in inside the classroom, which has air-cooled air coming in through and circulating inside the entire hall. Now, the image that you see on top is the view of one of the classrooms after it was built. And on the other side, the sketch that you see is a yet unrealized railing of these buildings. Yeah? The terraces are all to be used, and the railings are actually using the metal work of the Agaria tribes. Agaria tribes are, from time immemorial, they're working on metal. Yeah? They work on steel, and they don't weld. They just bend and connect things. Yeah? And they sculpt literally with steel. So the idea was to hire them to come and do all the parapets of all the 7 blocks. Yeah? And this was a sketch denoting that. But before this could be done, Arjun Singh lost elections. He lost elections twice. And the power moved from the Thakur lobby to the Brahmin lobby, and that was the end of my project. Yeah? Nothing more was built beyond that. And whenever I claimed my last fee, they wrote back long letters in Hindi, which I cannot understand. Okay, so I just crumble it and throw it away. So anyway, the end of the project came like that. Only this part was built. The entire site, 10 acres, was not developed. If the whole thing was developed, it would have been a very different experience of being there. So only this one part, which actually was derived from Ram Gopal's sketch, could get constructed. That's another view of the hall during evening time when there are no classes. And that's the last slide. That's another view of the same classroom. They're about 10 meters by 10 meters, quite large spaces, with air-cooled environment. And that is my last slide. Thank you for your patience. I'm very sorry for taking too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor K.T Ravindran, for your informative and inspiring talk. Your thrust on POISE in context is looked up to with pride. Next, we'll have a panel discussion, following which we open the floor for questions. Academician and co-founder of the firm RGB Studio. She is currently the Foundation Studio Lead at Seed School of Environmental Design. Abid Rahim is a co-founder, principal architect and urban spatial analyst at R&D. Thomas Uman is an architect, urbanist and PhD candidate in architectural history, theory and society at the University of California, Berkeley. And our fourth panelist, Sandhya Kurushingal, is a creative head and founder of Gracil Design, print and digital communication design studio. We look forward to a lively discussion on the topic, Is Modernism Dead? After which the floor is open for questions from the audience. The panel is moderated by Anubha George, former BBC editor, currently based in Kochi. She writes on Kerala culture for national and international publications. I request all the panelists to please come on to the stage.
Thank you. K.T. sir, I have no idea how this panel discussion is going to top your talk. I'm sure it's going to sound I think anything that happens after your talk is going to sound very bland. But we will try our best. No, thank you. You kept us captivated for nearly 2 hours, and I think that is that is such an achievement. Thank you so much. Would the panelists please join me here? I think your names are... Kunjan's coming. I think, Thomas, you're next to me. How much time do we have, Aditi? 15, 20? 15 minutes? Okay. So Is modernism dead? I think that is such an expansive subject, isn't it? I think you'll all agree. Is modernism dead? And you could quite possibly interpret it any way that you like. Modernism, as I understand as a student of literature, put in 3 words by the poet and writer Ezra Pound, quite simply, is make it new. In literature, the period lasts from 1890s, late 1890s to about the end of the Second World War, but I think that's when it begins in design. The end of the Second World War, well into the 1980s. And the words that are used to describe anything modernist are new, functional, innovative, edgy, fashionable. So in this context, I think this conversation is an important one to have, because are we still not using these words to describe buildings and what's happening around us? Can I put a disclaimer here? I'm not an architect or a designer, but as someone who writes on culture, and also as a resident of the city that I live in, I look at buildings and how they change the look or the shape of the city. So for example, the metro snaking through MG Road, does that make sense? Does it add anything? Yes, it's a modern element, perhaps, arguably. Or would it have been better done in a different way? And I think this is the context of this conversation. We have about 15 minutes, so let's keep it short and to the point, so we can wrap up in good time. Let me start by a very, very simple ice-breaking question. Would you all, one by one, Kunjan, we'll start with you, give us an example of a modernist architecture or a city that takes your fancy, that you really find attractive? I think your mics are just there. I think Kunjan and Sandhya are sharing, and then Thomas and...
I just want, because you spoke about Professor Ravindran's lecture, I thought, you were right. Everything after that seems kind of pointless. But I just wanted to say that the Sri Perumbudur project is a good way of thinking about this simultaneous uselessness of the word of, that word called modern, which is overused, because, for example, all the things that the Stabati does on site still happens on sites, most normal sites even today, just that the architects don't really know about it, the secret life of sites, right, where clients and asharis and masons carry on things which most architects might not prefer happen. So the question of whether this word is useful or whether it is dead, etc., kind of connects very well with, a process where he gave it kind of life, a formal life, but kind of informally happens every day on site. So it's not answering a question, but I'm hopefully trying to connect it with the, which is what struck me in the lecture.
Yeah, and I think I would kind of forward Thomas's line in the sense that I am again not answering your question.
You don't answer questions.
No, but I think the thing to note here is that being modern or being new is in the way that we use the word is maybe relevant at all times. The ism is dated. Yeah. And actually what we note also in K.T.'s work is that so he has this method, so he calls it the interiority, and he refers to it in the sense that, don't read on method, go read poetry, and all of that. So there is intuition as method, as somebody else has been kind of trying to articulate, is that you try and develop your interiority for response in context, what you call poise in context. And that preparation is practice. That is what I've been observing is, but contrary to that,
the ism has given us methods of production, which is also very evident. So there are places where you would see that schools have taught us that plans have to be made in using certain methods. And now that the context of the modes of production have changed, we are like, 60 years on, I think that the methods of production of space maybe need to move on. So if the ism is not dead yet, maybe it ought to be on its way out.
Okay, Abid?
I think there's a bit of an irony in the question itself. Is modernism dead? Because if I said yes, then in some sense I am being modern in rejecting the past, in saying that the past can be cut off. But I don't think it can be cut off. Yeah, so I also don't think things are any more purely modern or not. I think we're constantly global and local simultaneously, and then the world has become smaller. So this idea that, this modernist idea of a universal truth, I don't think applies anymore. In that sense, there are various ideas within modernism that probably are time to let go of and be dead with. But there is, I think, looking on this stage, the clothes that we wear, the phones in our pocket, the logos aren't there. Modernism is there, it's everywhere. I don't think this idea that you have something and then you let go of the past is a modernist idea. I don't think that's possible. I don't think you can completely let go of the past. And it's arbitrary to just say that you reject everything that's happened before you. To me, it doesn't make sense. I don't know if there is a modernicity. I think we are, there is modernity, but as a style, it doesn't exist. And I don't think there is, I think we are the sum of many things that have happened in the past. And in that sense, we're very much of the past and the present.
Thank you, Abid. Sandhya?
So from a design point of view, I don't think we can slot modernism into any specific, kind of box, okay? I think today it's a reaction to, or it's inspired by, or we can reject modernism, okay? And I think it's basically, it's an aesthetic that's, flowing. And we get either inspired by it or we reject it. And I think it's just a growing process, where we either borrow from it or we move away from it.
Okay, however, none of the designers have answered the initial question, which was, what to you is a modernist, a monument or a city that represents modernism? Other than you, Thomas. I'll excuse you.
Well, I'll tell you what the problem of the question is because there is this category called modern in some ways, a very insular category which makes it's an artificial category and a binary which really doesn't work, which is why the Sri Perumbudur project was interesting, because is it modern? Yes, it is. Is it non-modern? Yes, it is. Is it a hybrid? Most definitely it is. And we will see that when we look at categories called modern, let's say Chandigarh, which is a good example everyone knows. Yes, it's produced by certain methods of a modernist architect, but produced by pack donkeys and laborers carrying buckets of concrete on their heads, many people, lives lost, many villages displaced. So it's produced by a kind of rural labor that is, by most Western definitions, very non-modern. So is it a modern building? Yes. Is it a non-modern building? Yes. So we have, after 60 years of using the term modern and being slaves to it, found out that everything is a hybrid. And so your question of what is a modern city? Kochi is a modern city, Mattancheri is a modern city, Fort Kochi is a modern city. That question has become problematic for historians, architects to answer.
Well, exactly. That was the whole point of that question. Kunjan, as an educator, you and Abid are both educators. How are you teaching the young students about modernism then? In what way is it different to how you were taught?
I think one talks about any ism in context and not in isolation. So if the modernism has to be talked about, one has to talk about industrialism. One has to talk about the way the world changed during that time, how somebody else kind of articulates it as deterritorialization. So before the modern world, we were very, very territorial people. We were people who stayed in a place and understood a place. Once the world started to move, once systems of production became such that where you stay is not where you work, and those kind of movements started to happen where the consciousness of machine, or even though everything one can argue like a toy is a machine, but the consciousness of the machine in the industrial sense of the world became public. It changed the way things were organized. Yeah. And that is the context in which one would explain it. Yeah. So again, going back to your initial statement, how Pound calls, make it new. That was the agenda of most people, but I don't think it was ever utopian. I think it was more reacting to the world as they saw it, as they experienced it. And they said that the world is different. It has to be different from how we saw it. It has to be different from realism. It has to be different from naturalism, and so on. And that is how you would teach any movement. So now we are in a world where the revolution, the industrial revolution, is past us. We are seeing why the processes of mass production, processes of standardization, processes of statistical thinking, they do not necessarily make sense. So I think as an educator, I would put it in context. Of course there are examples, but they are examples, they are good examples for that time, not necessarily,
So are we then saying, Abid, this question is to you again as an educator, you work with young students, are we then saying that, looking at the question as is modernism dead, are we then moving back towards the traditional elements a little bit more? Is that what we're saying?
So let me take a simple example of typography. Okay. Earlier, when we worked on typography, there was the visual and then there was the type. But with modernism, what happened is we understood that the type itself becomes a very powerful element. Okay, so typography was then used as the message, and visual was broken down, okay, into grids and formats. And with modernism, what happened is that type became the essential element. Type became the design. Also, modernism had this impact of moving away from the earlier isms of, all of the embellishment and all of it. And hence, it was a very simplistic, functional mode of thinking. So I think that is where, in today's world, it has really helped us see into functionality.
Another term related to modernism, functional, isn't it? Abid?
No, I just think that there's a reduction of everything when we focus to a great deal on these isms and styles, and which are largely have become aesthetic. And I think Kuchan's point about in teaching it and in addressing and thinking about something as modernism is in realizing the context of it. Like when Baudelaire writes his essay, He's reacting to the bourgeois, he's reacting to systems at that point of time, and he's saying we need to let go of these, we need to step away and do something radically different. So it's a context that he's reacting to. But taking that tagline of being different, does it apply today? Like, in what sense does it apply? As critical thinking, yes. To ask the question, what is art? What is music? What is architecture? I think it's important. I think that's something that we could carry on, continue. That's part of modernism, and I think that's valid. But this being different, I think it was Wang Shu or Pelasmo, somebody was saying how this idea of being, when you say you want to be different, what you're essentially saying is you're rejecting everything that we learned over incremental systems and as incremental progress, just for the sake of change. And so what was learned through traditions is to be rejected simply because you choose to change, but not that there's something good or bad with what's there. So on one side, yes, critically asking what is art, what is architecture is valid, but this rejection of the past, I think, needs to be taken with a bit of salt, with a pinch of salt. So there's a bit of both. I'm not saying one should or shouldn't reject the past, but it has to be done with care.
Can I just add to that? So when we generally teach history theory, what we do is we introduce three concepts: modernization, modernity, and modernism. These are three concepts which are very different. So, and academically it makes sense. Modernization is what Gunjan said, the processes, so like industrialization, urbanization, a capitalist economy, what Marx called primary displacement. You know, the rural folk are displaced from their land, go to the city, labor is available. So these are tumultuous social forces, industrial forces. Modernity, lots of ways to define it. Modernity is the experience of that displacement. A Sthapati who has worked in a certain way suddenly is displaced, goes into the city, and now has to work in concrete. Like, so with different rules. So that's modernity, is the experience of modernity, and that's also historic, right? There's an experience of modernity in the 20s, which is different from the 40s, from the 50s. Now, modernism, in a way, is a reaction to the experience of modernity through a set of ideological commitments about style. Typically it is structural rationality, function, like you said, functionality, commitment to modern materials, abstraction. So what we do is we do not introduce this term in its isolation. We introduce three processes. One, like Gunjan said, is social, Abid and you said from a design perspective. One is style, which is modernist, and then the middle part, which is very important, modernity, is actually your experience. So it's incredibly personal and social. So we generally try to think of it in these three interconnected ways.
Okay, so then going forward, we have time?
Yes.
Yeah, let's open it.
In this opening, I'd like to ask, I think it was K.T. who brought up the question of is modernism dead? And I don't know if it was somebody else, but I'm curious to know why the question, and is there something behind that? And
K.T. sir, only you can answer that.
Well, thank you for giving me the mic again after such a long killing that I've done. The idea was that when you ask a question like this, people are forced to take sides. Okay? You have to say yes or no, but it's that kind of question. It's an entrapment of a question. And that is what will create controversy and then discussion. So it was a method. It was a method and not the substance. Yeah. Having said that, I'd also like to contest what you said, to make new. Yeah? Can you make old? You can't. Whatever you make is new, isn't it? The act of making is set in future, in time, advanced time, not in the past time. So when you say make new,
But you can make same. It will not be the same, but you can make same.
anyway, if you're making, the act of making is set in advanced time.
That is
So how can you make new? or you can't make old.
Or does new become old
So
at some
the
point?
idea of counterposing new against old itself is vacuous. So there is no discussion there actually.
With this
I
conversation,
had a strong feeling there was some naughty intention behind the question.
this conversation, however, is modernism dead? If I can compare it to, the conversation that is had repeatedly, is Facebook dead? It's a little bit, you could argue until the cows came home that yes, Facebook is dead, but equally, it's far from dead. So I think each time era probably has its own thing. And is that what you guys are saying? That, but like K.T sir said, let's take sides. Is modernism dead, yes or no?
Maybe the audience would like to take sides.
Is modernism dead? How many of you think it is? No?
Ramesh is running away.
Modernism for modernism's sake. But if it comes from the heart, if it is a genuine thing by an artist, I welcome it. I appreciate that, and I think most people will do that. But it should be genuine. Not create something which is not understandable by the public. Something for just deliberately being made. To be in the modernism group. What is the value of that? That I don't understand.
You were going to say something.
I think there was an interesting part in K.T.'s presentation where he talked about the Sangam era and how people lived, always represented things either by what they see in nature or their emotions, the Agam and the Puram, the two aspects. So there was a time when, all designs, not only architectural and building and all that, but I think all designs evolved from your experience with nature and also your emotions within you and within your cultural capacity. But later, at some point, it started getting influenced by maybe the time that has changed, which brought in things like industrialization and later on technological revolution and all that. But that happened only when products are being made. The kind of modernism that we talk about in history and all that, in art, it started happening even before. Even before any kind of industrialization, it happened in art. Later on, it probably augmented in architecture and all that, all these revolutions that has happened industrial as well as later on technological revolution. Now, we are coming to an age where we are trying to go back and learn from nature again, learn from biology. The new future or the neo future is now being defined as neo-biological revolution that is in front of us. Once again, there is this opportunity to do something that mankind has not done before, to be closer to nature, but not in the ways that we have known it in the past, but altogether a new revolution that is going to be the neo-biological revolution. So could we think that there is still possibility that modernism is not dead and it is going to be defining more horizons in the future?
Would anyone else like to contribute of the audience to this conversation? I think you guys are finding it. Yes, please.
Good evening, I'm Sangeeta. I don't know whether I'll be able to put it because anyway, I'll try. Modernism is, we say modern art, modern dress and all, but modernism has nothing to do with the architecture. I don't think it has anything with the structural design. We, what to say, like technology or it's method or the digitalization, that what we use, that can be modern, but what the base things cannot be, we can't change. Because if we want to have a door, front door of the house is 1000 millimeter, it has to be 1000. It cannot be 500. And in the modern age, no, it is like modernism. It's like if we can carry something new to the old, we can. If we want to add something new to the whatever is existing, we can call it modern. I think so.
Yeah, I think, see, so that in thinking about the question that was phrased, there are two things that I thought was, one reason I think that the question is relevant is especially in our present political context, of this idea of one universal truth, one absolute truth, which is very much one universal absolute right truth, or the right way to do things. This idea that across the world you do this, just one way of doing it. I think that needs to be questioned. I think that exists in a particular political reality where there's one view. And so there is a need to see the validity of a plurality, of being different kinds of, there are different kinds of people, there are different kinds of, different nature, different values, different systems, and they're all valid. So this question about the 1 meter door, it could be 50, it could be 60. In different cultures, the idea of a door, the meaning of a door, the height of a door may have different values. Yeah, so in one sense, I'm just saying that this idea of a universal truth that is part of the idea of modern needs to be questioned, and therefore this question of whether it's alive or dead is valid. The other side, I like to say that I think whether it's art, music, or poetry, or architecture, I don't think this modernity, or whether it's postmodern, there's one thing that defines it. There are numerous things that define it. And as K.T was talking about, there are numerous players, there are numerous people, there are numerous value sets that shape anything. And I think in some sense, this conversation in terms of styles needs to move away from it. There's so many other things about a building or anything that it's time we stop talking about these things simply in stylistic terms.
Yeah, I'm Jacob. One thing I would like to say is that actually when you talk about modernism, I would rather think that that is a disjunction that created a point where a whole lot of people, especially in our countries, were educated in a particular way of doing architecture, and then they look back onto their own context and realized from that standpoint, which is actually more, let's say, more structured standpoint, they looked at and found the values that was existing in our vernacular and created what subsequently William J. Curtis put together as the regionalist movement. That is actually the works of Bawa or Baker or Doshi or Correa and all that, or Hassan Fatih. And to me, that is the most meaningful thing, and I think it couldn't have happened but for the modernist education that those people had. That they were able to look at their own context from a modernist standpoint and come to a more meaningful way of architecture. That's what.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting point. And I think, Aditi, are we okay to carry on? Should we wrap up? Okay. Sure. No, that's okay.
Okay, sorry, mine is a very different topic. It's more about surviving the modern age. So my question is both to the architect Ravindran as well as the panel. So since all of you are urban designers, what can you share about your work or even ideas on adapting urban spaces for excessive heat waves, excessive flooding, and which will still resonate with, say, an average resident like me, and that's affordable, that's still usable?
That's a very interesting question.
No, I think
K.T. sir should take it.
I mean, you had some elements in your design, but
I'm actually confused with your question. So could you repeat your question?
Yeah, it's not really with modernism or not, but of course, climate change is it's happening right now. So I just want to know if you all could share some of your work or even ideas around making existing urban spaces sort of resilient to excessive heat, excessive flooding, and yet, usable, affordable for just the average resident, basically. Any thoughts or any work that you can share that, for example, you have adaptive reuse, you said, right? And any thoughts on that that you could share?
I was saying that an existing building is the only sustainable building. Anything else you built is going to consume more, create more climate change issues, create more problems, and then that is a modern problem. The climate change is actually a problem of modernism. Yeah? And I would also say to what Jacob had said, that this whole idea that somebody coming and saying that somebody is regional, it's like the regional Chitrahar, Hindi is mainstream, everybody else is regional Chitrahar. We used to have a program called Chitrahar. So it comes from who's at the center. Are they at the center, the people who give these names? Are they people who call somebody else regional? He assumes that he is the center. There is no center and periphery. Everybody is a center. Every form is a center. So this whole positing something as regional and something as mainstream is a power play. And by buying it, we are becoming victims of that power play, of what is center and what is not center. And I think a lot of the problems in climate change stem from that positioning that is taken by the so-called industrial cultures. Gunjan was, for instance, saying about how, the whole idea that city is a machine to live in. Okay? And also in the 70s, there was a writer called Herbert Marcuse. I don't know whether you're familiar with Herbert Marcuse. He's the 60s ideation guru. I belong to that generation. So he said, he called the modern man as a one-dimensional man. One-dimensional man whose life and his time is divided in a way as to fit the machine, the larger apparatus of modernity, to which he is fitting himself by dividing his time. So he has no life left to himself except on Saturdays, Sundays to pay for an expensive holiday to the beach with the family and so on in the Western context. So the assumption that that is the center of development and that we are all in the periphery is an erroneous way of looking at life, in my view. Yeah? So Jacob, you're welcome to refute what I'm saying. So I feel that...
now trying to make it into a real debate.
No, the real issue is that it is that lifestyle, the mechanical lifestyle that she just alluded to, as well as when Marcuse said that we are one-dimensional people because we are just what you call a cog in the machine. We are fitting the larger apparatus of the city as a machine. Yeah? And that is the view which has brought us to this pass of climate change. If we are in this condition, it's because we have worshipped that form. That's what has created what you call the modernities in our current contemporary living. So modernism as an ism, as you rightly said, they are different things. Modernism, modernity, modernization. Modernization is a process. Modernity is a condition. Modernism is a conceptually defined style. Yeah? So here the question is modernism dead? Which means through that stylistic window, you are looking at the mechanical production of life that we are part of as architects. And if that is not dead, we are going to have more and more storms, we are going to have more and more floods, we are going to have more and more sea level rise, yeah? And temperature rises. So I think we have to see it in a connected way, and that connected vision is what should actually give us some recourse to answers. I wouldn't say the answer themselves, but some windows that we can open are these windows. Yeah? So this central position which the industrialized life cycle has taken, pushing everybody else to the periphery, is central also to the problem of climate change. So, where is modernism as a representation of that lifestyle lie? Should it be dead? If it's not dead, should we kill it now in this room? That's, I think, is the question.
I'm actually very tempted to kill it because of, well, what you just said. But then it also, you know, the death of modernism leads to, if we are discussing the death of modernism, then we also need to discuss that what do we do with these huge increase in population that we are seeing? Can it only and only be resolved the lack of space that we have, or we are going to have very soon? Doesn't modernism come into question in that context too?
Could I just respond to something
Sure.
Jacob said first? No, so this, even like in line with what the Professor K.T is saying, that this, even critical regionalism, the critique is that we associate, for example, I think in the initial essays, Frampton's essays, he talks about the Mexican Barragan. And he uses Barragan as a representative of the alternative, as a contemporary way of doing Mexican architecture. But again, there is a power play there to say that he defines what Mexican contemporary design, how do you be, what is regional India? We do as architects, I think we do a small minority of what is being built. Where do we get to claim what is regional? What right do we have to claim what is regional? Isn't it again a matter of power play, saying this is what's regional? So there is the critique of critical regionalism as well. That, I mean, who claims authority of what the style is, what is regional? Yeah, so I just wanted to repeat, but I think you wanted to say something.
I was just saying, I wanted to respond to what K.T said and what Biley's question was, and kind of connect back to what your earlier question was of, is the answer to look back at the past? And, you know, to go back to Biley's question, and see, it's always been a feedback loop. It's, so what K.T was saying, that can you make old? You cannot ever. So you're always responding. But maybe the problem is that you keep repeating your mistakes. That is a problem. Yeah. So maybe the making new is to kind of step back, look at the thing and say, well, we're getting it wrong, so let's do it again, let's do it better. So that has been the evolution of the entire human design history. That's how we have changed the entire planet. You know, those giant animals are not there anymore because the hunters kill them. Yeah, so the entire planet is different, and now we are here, we are going to face climate change, and I'm going to be an optimist and say that we are going to do something about it, because collectively we are getting a consciousness about it, because collectively, like you were saying, the human population, and there are so many people on who are going to be much more comfortable with another form of intelligence that at least I can't fathom because of my education, because of my training. I can't fathom a design thinking that is, that harnesses machines, that makes us kind of bio-robotic. You know, that machine is not other than you, it works with you, and you start producing something which is in another form altogether, which is not really in this, even remotely in the same paradigm that that industrialization did. I think I mean, everybody is talking about it. So, but it's not there in a mass form. Like, I don't know, I have maybe glimpses of it in the devices that we have, but it's not there in the way we make buildings. It's not there in the way we deal with gravity and material. But maybe it'll come.
Sandhya, would you like to add to that?
So what I would like to say is that, see, the modernists believe that form should follow function, okay? And the era came into the limelight because they were going against a certain period, okay? So I think today we've recognized the fact that yes, form does follow function, but we also introduce a certain sense of aesthetics to it. And I think that aesthetic inclination has come from a certain area or a certain organic process also that we've opened ourselves out to. Yeah.
I'd like to be optimistic about global change, but I think there are certain realities about modernism and the values that come along with it, the individualism, capitalism, that makes self-interest priority number one beyond anything else. And as long as those values exist, yeah, we have a problem. I think we won't deal with. Why would it cooperate? Why would anybody want to bother about the rest of the world if they're placing their self-interest first? But it's not our generation's issue, it's the next generation's issue. It's not my money, my lifestyle. Why would I want? So I'm not, these are underlying values that modernism has brought. Industrialization, capitalism. And I think unless we let go of them, I think there is a problem. But hopefully, yes, we will figure it out.
Thomas?
I still will try to answer your question and also the climate change question and Professor Ravindran's provocation. And like I said, this usually a whole semester or 2 semesters spent discussing this issue. But what Professor Ravindran said is, the question we might be able to answer more is the modern dead? So the modern is a particular way of looking at things. For example, a way of looking at the world as sacred and secular, right? As nature and culture, as tradition and modernity. We think in these dyads or these dualistic terms. So what Professor Ravindran was saying is that it's also a way of thinking about it in terms of crisis, you know. So this is a way of thinking which is maybe some people say 200 years old, some people say 500 years old, the argument varies. So we are in a certain way in the prison house of the modern, because we, even in Professor Ravindran's presentation, he has to use words like sacred and modern and traditional. Like, you know, we have to separate out these terms, which is a very, very modern condition, right? While a Sthapati sees the entire world as enchanted, like the stone. The stone is not separate from the hill, is not separate from the building, is not separate from the rock, right? So can we go back to that condition of viewing the world like that? Unlikely. So is the modern dead? It's not going to be dead. That thing can't be put back together. Is modernism dead? Maybe a kind of modernism is dead, because when we teach history, we teach early modern, high modern, late modern, neo-modern, and whatever is next. So, you know, every 20 years you have something else, or maybe every 2 years. But is the modern dead? That way of experiencing the world as crisis, as duality, probably not going to happen. Is modernism dead? This is a less interesting question.
Well, I guess, is the modern dead is a discussion for another time. Would anyone else like to contribute anything? Okay, let's close this conversation. Any closing thoughts from any of you, sir? K.T. sir? Thank you so much for being such a pleasant and such an attentive audience. Thank you so much, most importantly, for the privilege of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anubha, and all the panelists. Now we would like to present you all. Now may I call upon Aditi Nayar, Director, Kerala Museum for Vote of Thanks.
Hi, last few remaining folks in the audience who are diehard fans. You know, Tanzim and I were scripting today's event, and we said, what do we say in the vote of thanks? Do we say, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming here? And somehow it went against everything that, you know, because the idea of the space is not really that you take time out of your normal day and come here to do something special, really, but to come here, and this needs to be the normal, you know. So the idea was that we do have this space where we can talk about issues that we have multiple perspectives on, and different people can bring those issues to the table and talk about it, present their opinions and their ideas and their learnings, their experiences and all of that. And so when K.T said that he's going to come here to speak, he was actually coming to do work with the museum, because he's a trustee of the museum, and we're thinking of what we can do for the next 5 years at the museum. So when K.T said, yes, he's coming here, he's ready to travel, even in spite of rising COVID numbers all over the country and all of that, I said, great, let's have this first conversation. And let's kind of, even if we can only sometimes do the physical in today's new world, if we can just have these conversations where we can start bringing people together to discuss things from various different points of view. It's something that, especially putting these things out there in a city like Cochin is really important. I think some of you, especially like I can see Bala nodding there, we know that we really want to have conversations like this in a place like Cochin, and gradually let's hope more and more people will come together to do this. So I would really like to thank right from the beginning K.T for saying yes, of course, to coming and doing this talk here at the museum. I'd really love to thank the IUDI team who have sent me logos, supported me with so many other things, and Billy has been a solid rock in the organizing and planning of this thing. And IUDI and Kerala Museum together jointly put this whole event together. I want to thank the staff of the Kerala Museum from the bottom of my heart, because this is the very first post-COVID event that we have had, and some of you have been there for some of our events pre-COVID and packed halls, but a totally different team who had years of experience organizing all of this, and this is a brand new set of folks who have really never seen something like this happen. So those guys are really, and more than anyone else, also our intern Nikita, Tanzim from IUDI, and the volunteers who have pitched in today from SEMS College and from our very own museum volunteering heritage and museum field school that we have going. 5 of them have also been part of this event, and I think that's one great thing to see happening, that we have support coming from a volunteering force, which is something a museum desperately needs to stay on its feet. Have I missed anyone else? If I've missed anyone else, please forgive me. Yeah, thank you all for coming and being part of the event. We hope we can bring you more like this in the future. If there's anyone who's really keen to present their work, of course, please get in touch. Let us know. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.
Had a chance. I request all of you to please remain seated for a while. Ma'am, can we have it on the stage, please? That's fine. All right. Thank you. I request all the guests who have not had a chance to go through the displayed works of Professor K.T Ravindran to kindly have a look at the exhibition panels of KTR studio works. Hope you all had a great evening. We have arranged tea and snacks in the hall below. Kindly proceed down. Thank you.